Welcome to the Wandering Ecologist podcast with me, Penny Green, celebrating positive nature conservation news, one story, one friendship, one wild place at a time. Today I'm at the Global Birdfair at Rutland, recording in front of a live audience. Yay! And I'm with my friend and longtime conservationist, Dr. Tim Mackrill from the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. Hi Tim, how's the show going for you so far?
Really great, Penny, and great to be here. What an honour to be your first guest.
I know, this is so exciting. So this is the launch of my new podcast. I'm very excited to have such an esteemed guest. So this place must hold some pretty special memories for you, as this is where you cut your teeth in conservation, isn't it, Tim? With a very special bird, and one that you went on to study for your PhD.
Yeah, ospreys. Ospreys have become synonymous with Rutland over the last few years, and I grew up down the road, and when Tim Appleton and Roy Dennis started the Osprey reintroduction here in the mid-90s, I was very young and still at school, but I just thought, wow, that sounds such an exciting opportunity, and got involved as a 15-year-old
That's amazing.
For the first time, which was in 1997. And my interest with ospreys has just gone on from there. And I just feel really lucky to have been, to have met two people who really became kind of mentors to me, Tim and Roy, who have always had a real proactive approach to the restoration of nature. Starting with ospreys here, but doing all sorts of other things. And so yeah, this is where it all began for me. And I'm still very much involved. So I still live locally. And although I'm involved with loads of different projects through Roy's foundation, I'm still monitoring the local ospreys and seeing how the population is developing. So yeah, it's always great to be in Rutland.
And that's so good. It's like someone that's managing conservation projects to still be involved at the grassroots as well. So you're still out there doing the monitoring on a day-to-day basis and still involved.
I think that's really important because it keeps you kind of really grounded. But also that's why we got involved in the first place. I don't need to tell you that, but as you progress through your career, you inevitably end up with more paperwork and more time behind a computer. But the thing that Roy has always advocated, which I think is brilliant, is that it's essential to have time in the field. You need to really know the species you're trying to protect and restore. And so, he's always been an advocate of that, and that's what I've tried to continue. So although, through managing different projects, obviously that does involve the other side, my first love is being out in the field monitoring birds of prey particularly, but just being out in the field monitoring wildlife full stop. It
doesn't get
fantastic.
better than that, does it? And to be mentored by two people that are so inspiring and have that can-do attitude, it's like getting on and doing something from an early age. That must have been really inspiring for you.
It was, because I think I feel, at that stage in your life, you're very impressionable. And to meet people like that who really did have that can-do attitude, but not just a can-do attitude, it's an attitude where if stuff goes wrong, it doesn't matter. Roy always says the only way you avoid anything going wrong is by never doing anything. And both Tim and Roy are really open to the idea of just trying stuff, because it's by trying stuff that you learn. You learn that it works, or you learn that it doesn't, and if it doesn't work, then often you learn far more than if it does.
Sure.
And so I think that was a really good grounding for me, because it's something that I've tried to stay true to. And I feel like a lot of conservation now is quite risk averse, because people are worried about stuff going wrong and making mistakes, but actually, who goes through their life without making mistakes? It's impossible. So I think that that combination of a can-do attitude, but also a willingness to just try stuff out, was really influential on me.
So good. That's so inspiring at that early age. And we're obviously not here to talk about ospreys today, but we're going to go from one fish-eating raptor to another, because we're here to talk about the amazing success story of bringing the white-tailed eagle back to England, which has been a huge success and in quite a short amount of time, hasn't it? You must be completely blown away by that. So, and for those that haven't been lucky enough to see this behemoth of a bird, can you describe what it looks like? It's the largest bird bird of prey in England or in Britain. It's a most amazing animal.
It is.
It?
It's a stunning bird. I mean, I must say that for such a big bird, they're quite hard to see often. They spend a lot of time perched around. But if you see one in flight, it's totally unmistakable because they are so big. You know, people often refer to them as flying barn doors, and that's because they've got these really broad wings. So the wingspan's about 2.5 metres. But the depth of the wings, the broadness of the wings is what really stands out. So sometimes you might see them. A white-tailed eagle, because it's so big, when it does fly, it gets mobbed by everything. And then you might see it being mobbed by a buzzard or a red kite, and that really gives you an idea of just how big they are. The adult birds obviously have the distinctive white tail where the name comes from and a kind of pale head. But the young ones are brown all over, so it takes them 5 years to go from that brown, chocolatey brown juvenile plumage right the way through to what we might call a full adult. But it's really the size, whether it's a juvenile or an adult, it's the size that makes them stand out so much.
Absolutely, and they're pretty hefty when they're weighing in as well, aren't they?
They are. I mean, it's funny actually because just recently we've been doing a lot of osprey ringing, and then obviously we're also tagging eagle chicks as well. And I actually use the same bag for transporting eagle chicks from the nest to the ground and osprey chicks. And whereas I can probably fit 3 osprey chicks in the same bag, you could only ever get 1 white-tailed eagle.
Wow.
And, you know, so an average male might weigh 4.5 kilograms, but a female can be 6.5, 7. So they really are.
Wow, that's
they
massive,
are big
isn't it?
birds. Yeah. And, you know, you kind of never cease to be impressed by them. And when someone sees one up close for the first time, they are just blown away. And it's quite funny because sometimes someone will say, I think I might have seen one. But if there's any doubt, you haven't, because when you see one, they are so unmistakable that you know it is a white-tailed eagle.
Definitely is. And the talons, I mean, obviously you've been up close and personal with the talons. They are massive. They're the size of a hand, aren't they?
The talons are the most impressive thing. And I mean, we'll go on to the Isle of Wight project in a minute, but when we're satellite tagging the birds prior to release, we actually have to go into the aviaries and catch the birds that are capable of flying. And the talons are the things you have to be really careful of because they're big, they're very powerful and very sharp. So yeah, that's what they use to catch the prey, but they're just the most majestic birds.
They are. They're very regal, aren't they? And you just can't be... so your breath is so taken away when you see them, isn't it? It's just an amazing thing to see. And so talking about the size of talons and catching prey, what is the eagle feeding on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've been really keen to do with the Isle of Wight project since we started is to really monitor the population closely because, you know, you won't be surprised to hear that at the time when we first proposed the project, there's a lot of support, but there was also some antagonism, some opposition, and people who were concerned about the potential impacts to livestock, but also, you know, birds of conservation concern. And so we felt that it was really important from the outset to very carefully monitor the diet. And we're able to do that because all the birds we release and those that are fledging from wild nests, we satellite tag, which means that we know where they are 24 hours a day. And so then we can crucially actually go and watch them in the field and monitor them in the field and record what they're eating. And since the project started in 2019, we've got over 800 diet observations which show what they're eating, also quite often how they acquired the prey. And what that shows is that for the young birds, carrion's really important. So they're kind of scavengers for the first couple of years of their life, or they might be taking things like rabbits. But as they mature, they tend to home in on wetlands. Wetlands are really where they want to breed. And so the proportion of fish in the diet just slowly increases. And then the pairs that we've had breeding, fish has been the main prey item for the chicks. And so along the south coast of England, there's so much potential white-tailed eagle habitat in the estuaries, but also in freshwater river valleys and so forth, because they're just as capable at catching freshwater fish as saltwater. So places like Poole Harbour, they might be catching mullet and bass in the shallow estuarine water there, but equally some of the freshwater wetlands, they're catching things like carp, pike, even eels and things like that. So there's a real diversity of prey, but fish is very much what they prefer if they can get them.
And I've been lucky enough to actually see them sitting by some of the ditches, like actually fishing. So they're just looking into the ditch going, oh, what do I fancy for dinner tonight? And then sort of just going, plopping in and catching.
They're like a giant kingfisher.
It's amazing to see.
And it's amazing. You see some of the wetlands where they're at, and they'll be perched, just kind of seemingly not doing very much. Then suddenly, like you say, they just plop down into the water and come out with a fish. And it just means that, they're so well able to not just kind of feed themselves, but then provide food for the chicks. And the pair that have bred for the last few years have been really successful, and I think that is because there is this wealth of abundance of food availability in southern England, so they should over the next few years do really well.
So just rewinding a little bit, and I suppose the interesting thing is that you've brought them back to southern England, and I suppose we associate white-tailed eagle with Scotland and the big rugged mountains up there, but actually they were a bird of southern England as well, which I think a lot of people are surprised about. It's not a natural thing you think of. So what made them become extinct in the first place?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I mean, a lot of our rare birds of prey are often synonymous with areas that aren't necessarily the best habitat. It's just where the population, well, in the case of white-tailed eagles, where it was initially reintroduced, but for some species it's just where there wasn't persecution, so it's kind of a refuge away from the areas where they were killed out. And that was the case with the white-tailed eagles. So they were relentlessly persecuted. We know that historically they were widely distributed across the whole of Britain, including southern Britain. But because they ate fish, just like the osprey, they were selectively persecuted from basically the Middle Ages onwards. Particularly when Britain was Catholic and fish was eaten on a Friday for religious reasons, anything that ate fish was selectively persecuted. So the bounties that were paid for a white-tailed eagle or an osprey to be killed were the highest available. So it was beneficial to local people to eradicate the landscape of those species because they were paid to do it. So that meant that the bird that was really widespread disappeared. So the project on the south coast is very much about restoring them to an area where, were it not for the actions of man, they would be here and they would be thriving. And the thing with white-tailed eagles is because the Scottish reintroduction took place on the west coast, the species is now synonymous with those kind of rugged landscapes. But if you've been to mainland Europe, you might have seen white-tailed eagles in Poland, in the wetlands in the middle of Poland. You could see them on the outskirts of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. You can see them nearly in the city centre in Helsinki.
That's amazing, isn't it?
So it's a bird that can live alongside people. But when we first proposed the project, a lot of people said, well, is there space for them in southern England? And yet now they're thriving really well and they're fitting into the landscape.
They really are, and I think where they are sort of in southern England now, there's a huge support for them, isn't there? People are loving seeing them in the landscape again. It's quite amazing. I think
that's one of the really pleasing aspects for us, is that so many people have enjoyed seeing them. Whether they be bird watchers who are monitoring their local birds, or sometimes just members of the public. I remember in the first, the COVID lockdowns, it seems a bit of a distant memory now, but that was not long after we'd started the project, and it's hard to kind of envisage it now, but we were all stuck at home in our gardens, and people were actually seeing the birds on these big dispersal flights they do, going over their garden, and they just said what an incredible experience. And then we've also had paragliders, hang gliders, circling up on thermals over the Isle of Wight or the South Downs, and look across and suddenly they've been joined by a white-tailed eagle.
Wow.
That might be 20, 30 metres away, and we've had emails where people just said it was the most incredible experience I've ever had.
I could imagine it would bring you to tears, that kind of that, getting that close and personal with an eagle, something that beautiful.
Yeah, and Roy's always said that rare birds shouldn't be confined to nature reserves. That's a failing of nature conservation if that's the only place you find them. We should be finding these species across the landscape. And so the fact that people are encountering white-tailed eagles, yes, in the great wetlands that we've got, but also just elsewhere, I think is a really positive sign of how things can change for the better. And
the fact that people are getting excited about it and you're bringing people along with the project, which is just an amazing thing. Obviously there was a hugely successful reintroduction of white-tailed eagles into Scotland. What inspired the idea to get them back in southern England? What was the spark?
I suppose Roy was really the kind of the inspiration behind it, because Roy's been involved with the restoration of white-tailed eagle in Scotland since the late 60s, when they brought George Waterston, who was the director of the RSPB of Scotland at the time, brought 4 young white-tailed eagles from Norway to Fair Isle when Roy was the warden there in 1968. And they had a go, and it wasn't successful, but it was the kind of precursor to then the wider project that took place during the 70s, 80s and early 90s. And so, he had that first hands-on experience. And in the early 2000s, after the ospreys had been reintroduced here, there was talk about trying to restore the white-tailed eagle to East Anglia. unfortunately, it had some real momentum to begin with, and then the farming lobby started opposing it, and eventually the Conservative government who were voted in stopped it. So it kind of just came to a dead end. However, we just felt that by 2018 things were slightly changing. There was more of a positive outlook for reintroductions, and we just thought maybe there's an opportunity to try again. And those south coast estuaries, which are just full of mullet and bass, we just think are just such a perfect place for white-tailed eagle, and we know that they bred across the whole of that coastline, that we just thought, well, we've got to go for it. And at the time, Michael Gove, who was the Environment Minister, we knew he was supportive, and we just felt, well, look, it's a classic case if you just got to get it done, and that was the time to do it. And of course, you're never going to get complete consensus with a project like that. There's the predictable opposition from some members of the farming community, not all, but some members, and not helped by the real sensationalist press reporting you sometimes get from Scotland, which really doesn't help. But also from some conservationists who felt that white-tailed eagles posed a threat to some of the rare species who they thought should be more of a priority for conservation. So, we had to just be determined to do it, and I think that's a key message. And one of the other organisations I'm involved with is the Osprey Leadership Foundation, which was set up a few years ago, and we're always telling the young people we work with that you have to be brave with the work you do. And it was a case in point really with the white-tailed eagles, because it would have been very easy to kind of think, we need to get more people on side first. But we knew from the experience across Europe that the bird would fit into the southern England landscape, and we just had to make it happen. And luckily, Forestry England were incredibly supportive, and a special mention to Leanne Sargent, who's a senior ecologist in the South District. Leanne was such a massive help and one of the key drivers behind making it happen. And we got a licence, and 6 years later the birds are breeding. It's still early days and we can't be complacent, but the early signs are really encouraging. And I think for me, one of the really encouraging things is there's been no conflict. So there was worries regarding lambs and livestock, but there's been no cases at all of any livestock predation since we started. And the birds are in a landscape where lambs are being born outdoors, but because there's a really high abundance of natural prey in southern England, there is no conflict. And I must say that a lot of the farming community have been hugely supportive. There's often this narrative presented that farmers are against white-tailed eagles, but that's not the case. A lot of them have been incredibly supportive, and I think that's really important to point out.
And kind of proud to have them on their land, and think that their land, the habitat they have there, can actually support such amazing birds of prey. And if you've got those kind of birds there, that the rest of the ecosystem must be functioning pretty well to be able to support them. So that's a badge of honour for them, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's the other thing regarding species like white-tailed eagle. It's a big apex predator. And it's something that we've lost from our landscape. We've killed them all out. We've got no lynx, we've got no wolves, we've got no bears. They've all been eradicated. And the white-tailed eagle, is one of the first of those apex predators to come back. And actually, it's about, when you look at the ecological function of the bird, it is serving a key role, because they are able to suppress potentially some of the mid-level predators. They predate corvids. In Lithuania, they take the chicks of common buzzards. So they're actually performing an ecological role. They're taking, feral geese. In the Netherlands, they're well known to suppress the populations of feral geese. We're already seeing that in southern England. So, quite aside from the fact that I feel we've got a moral obligation to restore a species like this, it's actually performing a key ecological role that's been lost from the landscape.
Absolutely, and we are still trying to find that equilibrium, aren't we, with our ecosystems as they are now, as they're trying to recover. Yeah. But getting those real apex predators are an important part of that story, aren't they? So back to the release side of things. I mean, it's how many birds have you actually released so far?
So up until this year, 37. These projects are never straightforward, and we ran into COVID and then avian flu, so that has limited. We hope that by 2023 we would have released 60, but because of the complications around those two things, it's kind of slowed us up slightly. But we've released 37. We're going to be releasing some more birds on the Isle of Wight this year. So we're kind of getting close towards the the initial aim.
Absolutely.
But the pleasing thing is that the survival's been higher than we expected. So, for example, of the 6 birds we released in the first year, 3 are still alive. Of the 7 we released in the second year, 4 are still alive. So you can really see that after they get through their initial early years, when mortality is much more likely,
even in a natural situation,
they're doing well. And the thing we can always guarantee with these translocations is that you are giving them a really good start. So we're probably giving them more food than they would naturally get in a nest. So when they fledge, they're in really good condition. And then what we do with the release is we're basically replicating the natural provisioning of the parents. And white-tailed eagles are provisioned by their parents until they disperse. So it can be for several months. And for several months at the release site on the Isle of Wight, we continue to provide food. So those chicks can come back and they can take the food for as long as they want to until they disperse. And so we're giving them a good start. And then, of course, there's all manner of things that can go wrong. And there's been there's no one main cause of death of the birds that haven't survived. It's just a kind of myriad of reasons that was to be expected, really. But overall, it's positive that the survival has been higher than we expected.
From a success story point of view, it's been unbelievable getting these magnificent birds back in the skies again. But I think you've also had the most amazing success story in another sense, and much earlier on in the project than you could have ever have dreamed of. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the breeding. Yeah,
it's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, white-tailed eagle is a bird with real delayed sexual maturity, so they quite often don't breed till they're 5, 6, 7 years old. So when you start a project like this, it's very much you're in it for the long term. You're not just going to suddenly have them breeding the next year. You've got to be patient, and it's the same actually with ospreys. I mean, when I think it's 29 years since the first ospreys were released here, it takes a long time. But what we've seen is that with the first pair that bred successfully, they actually bred successfully at 3 years of age, which was way earlier than we were expecting. And not only that, at 3 years of age, they produced a single chick. Then last year, the same pair bred again and had 2 chicks. And this year, they've got 2 again. And so,
amazing.
These early successes really bode well for the future because, they're breeding at a young age, but then when they are breeding, they're producing lots of chicks. And we know from other populations of white-tailed eagles that they are capable of producing 3. So I think the next thing for that pair is that hopefully one year they might produce triplets. But
there's a lot of pressure on these guys.
I know, well, they've set a high bar for themselves. That's the problem. But it's exceeded our expectations so far. And like I say, it is still early days. But that moment when you see a chick in a nest in southern England for the first time, that makes all the effort that goes into these projects really worthwhile. I don't want to go off on a rant here, but one of the things that really annoys me about the critics of reintroductions is when they say they're vanity projects, and but if those people understood the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see, the amount of not just work but emotional energy that you invest in it, I think they would look at it slightly differently. And when you just, so then when you do, you have a lot of difficult times and low moments, but when then there is a chick in a nest, it's just like, this is why we do it, and this is why we want to continue doing it, because it's about restoring a bird that should be common. It shouldn't be rare, it should be widespread. We should have them at Rutland Water. I'd love to think in the future someone could be at the bird fair and see a white-tailed eagle fly over, because it's a bird that people should be familiar with. I mean, Poland, it's the national bird. And so there's no reason why in the future that won't be a similar story in England.
Move it from the robin to the eagle. I love that idea. It's so good. And just to bring it sort of full circle back round to the Osprey Leadership Foundation, because this podcast is very kindly sponsored by Leica, and I know that Leica are also sponsoring you guys at this festival this year as well. I wanted to give you a chance to plug this Leadership Foundation because I think it's the most fantastic thing, getting young conservationists up and running and feeling bold and empowered to do some great conservation work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was given some really great opportunities at Rutland Water when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. And I think those, as I said to you earlier, those early experiences really shaped my career. And so in 2018, I set up this charity, the Osprey Leadership Foundation, which really works with young people. And we're working with young people. The Osprey link is that we're working with young people both in the UK but also in West Africa, so the two ends of the Osprey's flyway. And it's all about empowering them to be basically authentic, effective, but crucially brave conservation leaders, and to recognise that anyone, whatever position you hold, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're working in your local community, whether you've got a job in conservation, you can make a difference. You tend to think, when people say, what's a leader, they might think of a chief executive or a politician. But actually, our argument is that anyone can be a leader, anyone can show leadership. It's about finding your voice, finding what you're passionate about, and then trying to enact change. And so the organisation is all about trying to really inspire and enable those young people to make a difference. And, you only have to watch the news every day and read the news to see the peril the planet's in. But I feel a sense of hope, because there is this kind of groundswell of young people who are determined to do things differently and make a difference. And so that's what we're trying to do.
And you are one of those young people that are now still obviously very young, Tim.
Yeah, I know, I'm stretching the definition of young, I think.
But you've gone on to make a difference in conservation, and I think that's wonderful. So, yeah, totally support that. And hopefully people can go online and find out a bit more about how they can support this initiative. I think it's fantastic.
They can. So Osprey LF is our website. Go on and have a look.
And also, if people want to find out more about the white-tailed eagles, where can they look in for that? Like, there's some great blogs and podcasts that you guys are doing.
So we've done some Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation podcasts, which you can find if you just search for us. But also go onto our website, roydennis.org, for all the latest news. And we don't publish live tracking data for the eagles because it's obviously a bit sensitive. But what we do is we provide fairly regular updates. And there are a few key places you can see them, and I think if you want to go and see a white-tailed eagle in southern England at the moment, the best way to do it is to go to Poole Harbour and to go on to one of the fantastic boat trips that Birds of Poole Harbour organise, because there's a pair of eagles established in the harbour, and the views that you sometimes get from that boat are fantastic. And I remember last year in August I was on one of the boats, and actually Emmanuel Jatta, who's one of the young people from the Gambia who is involved with the Osprey Leadership Foundation, was over, so I took him on one of the boat trips, and we actually saw a white-tailed eagle trying to steal a fish from an osprey, and I thought, that is just amazing to see those two species interacting.
Who would ever guess that you could see that at any point in their life? It's
amazing. In southern England, and I think
good.
That is just really brilliant, and those trips are fantastic, so I really recommend people have a look at that and book onto a trip.
Well, we have to wrap up now, but thank you so much, Tim, for being my first ever guest on the Wandering Ecologist podcast, and for all the hard work you do to make these amazing reintroduction projects possible. You really are an inspiration to a lot of people. So thank you so much, and I wish all the best of luck with your future endeavours with this project.
Thank you, Penny, and what an honour to be your first guest. So thank you for inviting me.
Such good fun. Cheers, Tim. Thank you. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, which was recorded at the Global Birdfair at Rutland this summer. Huge thanks go to Dr. Tim Mackrill for being such a great guest and for sharing the excitement and successes of this reintroduction project with us. I'm always keeping an eye to the sky in case I'm lucky enough to see one of these huge birds cruise overhead in Sussex, and sometimes I'm rewarded. How amazing that it's even a possibility to see one here. I wish Tim and his colleagues all the best with the continued success of this project. Many thanks go to Matt Davison for the fantastic music and Katie Bolton for the fab artwork. Tune in again soon when I'll be having more wildlife adventures with friends. In the meantime, make sure you get outside with a friend to share some wildlife adventures too. Thanks to Leica for sponsoring the Wandering Ecologist podcast. I've been a Leica user since the very beginning. Whether I'm monitoring stone curlews or barn owls or conducting a dragonfly survey, I rely on their precision. With over 120 years of crafting premium optics, Leica brings exceptional clarity even in low light. The close focusing range reveals fine details others miss, and the rugged waterproof design means they keep going, whatever the weather. German engineering, trusted in the field, and craftsmanship I can count on.